Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to Allah for granting me this opportunity to perform this lecture. Today is part 2 of our series on Al-Andalus. So last week we done part 1, and we'll do a little recap about that, and then next week is part 3, and then the following week will be part 4, and we're covering the whole of Al-Andalus and more in detail, right? So today's lecture will be a bit different because last week we done like an hour and we kind of didn't talk about everything that we wanted to do. So yeah, let me just recap what we done last week. So we talked about how the Arabs, the Muslims, they invaded and opened up Spain. About 30,000 people conquered a population of about 5 million people. And a lot of people within the Visigothic kingdom helped the Muslims as they were, going through the lands. For example, we saw how the Visigothic nobles themselves, they assisted the conquest. Then we saw how the Jewish people, the Jewish community, because they were persecuted so much by the Visigothic Christians, that they helped the Muslims as well. And then we also saw how the Christians themselves, especially the middle class and the lower class, they helped the Muslims as they conquered. And then we talked about certain problems that arose within Al-Andalus. For example, Al-Hakam I, who was a very strong ruler, but he was very harsh. And we also talked about how we had a mini golden age under Abdul Rahman II. So that's where we are right now. Then we also talked about the so-called martyrs of Cordoba. So what happened was that these Christians, and this is a minority, right? This is a minority of Christians within Al-Andalus. They didn't like the Arabization and the Islamification of Al-Andalus because a lot of people were converting. At the time, now we're in the 850s, right? 1/3 of the population were Muslim. And the reason for this was due to the Arabo-Islamic culture. And the Arabo-Islamic culture, yes, there was some haram in it in that time. For example, there was drinking, there was dancing, there was music, there was all these kind of things, but people were attracted to that because it was the culture at the time. For example, nowadays, a lot of us try to be Western. Why? Because that is the culture of the elite right now. The West are the richest part of the world, and people want to be Westernized now. So it was like that back in the day. So some of these Christians, they were unhappy with what was happening. So certain Christians, they went up to the Qadi of Cordoba and they insulted the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this saw about 50 Christians from 850 to 859 voluntarily martyr themselves. They knew what they were doing and they were given a chance to repent. They were given a chance to say, I was drunk, or I'll become Muslim and my sins will be forgiven. However, they declined. They wanted to go through with this. So that's where we are right now. So of course, when this happens, even though it was a small minority, there was instability. So the ruler at the time, who was Muhammad I, he had to control the situation. And what he done was he integrated the church with the Umayyad state. So before it was somewhat independent of each other, they were now in conjunction with each other. Why? Because it would be easier to control and see what's going on. Because they didn't know what was happening, and so all these people came up and started to insult Islam. So another thing that happened that reduced the tensions was that many Christians migrated to the north. So when the Muslims came, the Visigothic kingdom got totally annihilated. It was devastated, and so many Christians fled to the north. And in the north of the Iberian Peninsula, there is mountains, and so the Muslims didn't have the capabilities to conquer these mountains. So the Christians, they formed their own states, and these states were kind of weak, yeah? But over time, they started to grow in power, and these Christians, they started to flee. So the ones that were unhappy with the situation, they went to up north, and the people that were, happy with the situation, and they didn't support what the martyrs done, they stayed in Cordoba. And the reason why they stayed in Cordoba is due to the fact that it was prosperous. It was a prosperous city. As we saw last week, when the Muslims first came, it wasn't that rich. But over time, it started to gain prosperity due to trade and whatnot. So many people didn't really want to jeopardize, let me forsake my religion, because a lot of these Christians thought like that. I don't want to forsake my religion for the prosperity that we're experiencing. So that's the situation. However, there's more problems. There's more problems for Muhammad I, and then his successor, Al-Mudir, who only rules for 2 years, and then his successor again, Abdullah, who rules for about 24 years. And the reason why there's a lot of issues is due to these Muwallads, more specifically, and then even Amazigh and Arabs, they start rebelling. A lot of them become semi-independent rulers that they want to carve up their own state. And the reason why you might be asking, why are the Muwallads, who are the predominant people that are rebelling, why are they, rebelling against the Umayyad state? And the reason for this is that Arabs were treated superior than non-Arabs. And this is the reality of Islamic history. Yes, Islamic history is beautiful, it's amazing, but we have to be real, yeah? Certain empires had a pro-Arab policy. So if you're an Arab, but you are not practicing, you didn't have good akhlaq, good deen, you are treated better than an Amazigh or Muwallad, and a Muwallad is someone that's a native Iberian convert. So most of the Muslims were actually Muwallad. They weren't Arab, they weren't Amazigh. Yes, they were Arabized, but they were actually native of the land. So yes, if you were Amazigh or Muwallad, you'll be treated worse than the worst of Arabs. This is the situation. So many people were unhappy with this because they were like, I'm Muslim, I want to play a part in the politics, but I can't because an Arab will have a better ranking than me in the governmental structure. So yeah, these Muwallids, they wanted to play a part in the state, and so we see several rulers across Spain start to rise up and form their own mini realms, right? So we have the first one by the name of Marwan al-Jaliki. And al-Jaliki, the name comes from Galicia, which is north of Portugal. And he began to seek separation from the Umayyad state. And he began to launch attacks against the Umayyad state. And the ruler at the time, Muhammad I, he was actually quite good at that time. He managed to quell the situation and he brought him to Cordoba. But when he was in Cordoba, he was given a very small position. He was given he was alienated. And so what happened? He escaped. And then he went to a place called Badajoz, which is in the west of the Iberian Peninsula, and he started to cause problems again for the Umayyad state. And you know what he would do? He would go from Badajoz, which is in the west, all the way to the south in Sevilla, and do raids. And back in them days, nowadays it's 2 hours by car from Badajoz to Sevilla. Back then it would be a week on horseback. So he had so much power that he would cause all these raids from west to south. And he was a big problem, though he eventually died in 890, and this is during Abdullah's reign. And his sons, the kingdom got split into several smaller successor states. However, they were still causing problems for Abdullah, and we'll go in it due course. We have Abdullah, then we have the Banu Qasi. And the Banu Qasi are another Muwallid clan that caused a lot of issues for Al-Andalus, for the Umayyad state, and they were situated in the far north, between the Christian states and between Al-Andalus itself. They carved out a nice sizable state, and then what they done was they massacred the Arab population because they were angry with what was going on at the time. They were angry with how the Arabs were having this kind of supremacist ideology. So that's the Banu Qasi. We've got Al-Jaliki. But the problems don't stop there. This is just the beginning. So we also have the biggest threat, and that is Ibn Hafsun. And Ibn Hafsun's story is very interesting. So he commits a murder in his youth, and because he's an outlaw, he has to escape. He goes to North Africa, and then someone in North Africa tells him, you should start rebelling against the state. Why? Because of how they're treating the non-Arabs in Al-Andalus. But another of his local grievances was that there was a lot of taxes levied on his region, which was Bobosra, which is also in the south. It's between Cordoba and Sevilla. So, and the reason why there was heavy taxes was due to the fact that when Al-Jaliki, so we're going back to Al-Jaliki, he was fighting against the Umayyad state, he captured and held ransom a man by the name of Hisham ibn Abdulaziz. And Hisham ibn Abdulaziz was a minister of the Umayyad government, and he was proper anti-Muwallads and anti-Amazigh. He was pro-Arab and an Arab supremacist. So, you know, when he got ransomed, it was a high sum, and so they started levying these taxes at different regions in Al-Andalus. So people were unhappy with this, especially Ibn Hafsun. So he started to rebel, and he was fighting against Cordoba. And what happened next is that he got captured. The same with Al-Jaliki, he got captured. But then again, you see how history repeats itself. Ibn Hafsun, he fled again. Why? Because he didn't like the position he was given by the ruler Muhammad I in Cordoba. So he again flees, and Ibn Hafsun continues to cause issues, continues to attack Cordoba and the state of Al-Andalus, to the point that he declares himself the supreme ruler, basically saying, I don't recognize you at all. I'm the ruler of Al-Andalus. And the reason why in his speech when he said he was the ruler, he said that he's going to free Al-Andalus from Arab oppression. And I'm not anti-Arab, I'm just saying this is the situation, we have to be clear, right? And Ibn Hafsun was a proper shaitan. This guy was proper, causing issues for everyone. You know what he done? You know the Abbasids, he asked legitimacy from the Abbasids. And if you guys remember from last week, the Abbasids and the Umayyads were the ruling dynasty of Al-Andalus, they were rivals. And so he asked for legitimacy from the Abbasids. But the Abbasids at the time were extremely weak. There was a lot of vassal states, for example, the Tulunids, the Aghlabids, and stuff like that. So the Abbasids were very weak. So later on, he goes to the Fatimids, and the Fatimids follow the Shia Ismaili religion. And again, he seeks legitimacy because he wants to get one up on the Umayyad state. And later on, during his lifetime, he apostates from Islam. He becomes a Christian. 899 to 900, around there, he becomes a Christian. So what this happened, you know what is? Historians say, the academic Western historians, what they say is that he became Christian for political reasons, not because of religious reasons. He just said that they say he became Christian because when he becomes Christian, he'll get support from the Christians within Al-Andalus and the Christians in the north of Spain. So, however, this has the opposite effect because the Christians don't increase their support towards him, and furthermore, it alienates a lot of his Muslim supporters. So from now, it was just a rebellion. Okay, he's fighting against us, that's it. Now it's turned into what? He's apostated and we need to remove him because he's apostated from the fold of Islam. And he also starts to patronize churches and stuff like that. So that is, you've got the Muwallad rebellions. You also have someone who declares himself the Mahdi. Someone who declares himself the Mahdi, yeah? A man by the name of Ibn al-Qit. And you know, subhanAllah, what's funny is that he was a member of the Umayyad family. His lineage goes to Hisham I. And if you guys were here last week, Hisham I was praised by Malik ibn Anas, rahimahullah, for being a pious and just ruler. And so you've got Hisham I, his lineage is that strong, and now he's declaring himself the Mahdi. And what we think is that he got persuaded by some people to declare himself the Mahdi. So, of course, when you declare yourself the Mahdi, you believe everyone else's interpretation of Islam is wrong. You believe that the way they follow Islam is absolutely incorrect. So you're going to start attacking and waging war, right? And subhanAllah, one thing he said was that I'm going to reach these walls with his army and it's going to crumble. He said that, and guess what happened? It didn't crumble. Why? Because he wasn't the Mahdi. He just believed he was because he was crazy, right? So that is Ibn al-Qit, and he declares himself the Mahdi. Not just that, now we have Arabs also rebelling against the state. A man by the name of Ibrahim ibn Hajjaj, and he's actually very strong administrator. He seizes the city of Sevilla, and Sevilla at the time was the second richest city in Al-Andalus. So you have Cordoba, which is the city in Muslim Spain, and then you have Sevilla. So this was a big problem. Sevilla is now under a semi-independent ruler, and he wasn't weak, he was strong. He built his own court, his own qadi, his own police force, and he was a very strong ruler. And if it weren't for him dying only 11 years into his semi-independent rule, he would have done many good things. So this is the situation. You've got Muwallads rebellions in Badajoz and Ibn Hafsun in Bobosra. You've got Sevilla. You've also got Toledo. And Toledo has always been a hotbed of independence and self-autonomy. And the reason for this was that the power was in Cordoba and Sevilla. These were the main cities were in the south. And later on, Malaga, Granada, and these things like that. But Toledo was in the center of Spain. And it used to be the capital of the previous rulers, the Visigothic kingdom. But when the Arabs came and the Amazigh came, when they came under the Umayyad banner, they changed the capital from Toledo to Cordoba. And the reason for this was that they wanted to suffocate the power of Toledo. Because Toledo, they had all these councils and it was a thriving city. And so they preferred to make their own, capital, and that was Cordoba. So you've got Toledo, you've got the Ibn Hafsuns, you've got Al-Jaliki, and you've got all these issues. Not just that. As I said before, the Christians were also gaining power in the north. After the Arabs came, as I said before, they were weak. However, they started to gain in power, the northern Christians, and they started to threaten Al-Andalus. And this was unheard of because for 150 years, the Muslims didn't really care about the Christians in the north because they were weak. But that was an issue. We also have another issue, and that is the Shia, the Fatimids more specifically, in North Africa. And a man by the name of Abu Abdullah, he begins preaching the Shia Ismaili ideology within North Africa. And he raises an army and he starts to cause problems in Western North Africa, so modern day Morocco and Algeria. And to make matters worse, the first Fatimid Caliph declares himself the Mahdi in 909 CE. So you have a situation where internally there's issues. You've got all these rebellions. You've got all these people trying to seek semi-independence or full independence. Then you have the Fatimids in the south, and they're dangerously close to Al-Andalus. Because from North Africa, from the north point of Morocco to the southern point of Spain, is very, very short distance. So they could easily, anytime, cross over and cause major issues. Then you also have the Christians in the north, who are gaining in power and causing issues for Al-Andalus. So this is the situation. And you may be wondering, how did the Emir react? So the Emir was first Muhammad I, and as we talked about, he was somewhat strong, but then it peters out after that. We have Al-Mundir, and then we have Abdullah. And I want to focus more specifically on Abdullah. Abdullah was a very pious man. He was a very pious man. He was very diligent in his deen. He practiced Islam to a T. However, he was a very weak and ineffective ruler. He was very suspicious as well. For example, he would have a bridge between his house, or his palace, sorry, and the great mosque of Cordoba, because he didn't want to be seen. Furthermore, he killed his sons. He killed his son Muhammad because he believed he was in collaboration with Ibn Hafsun. Then he killed his other son, Mutarif, because he believed he was also conspiring against him. So he was very, very, suspicious, and he wasn't the best of rulers. And he even arrested a large amount of people because they saw him while he was going hunting. Sometimes he would just go hunting, and he arrested them because they spotted him. So this was the situation of Al-Andalus at the time. But subhanallah, a very strong ruler comes into power, and his name is Abdul Rahman III. And as we talked about, there's Abdul Rahman I, Abdul Rahman II, Abdul Rahman III. And if you see the commonality between them two, is they're all very strong rulers, and they're all called Abdul Rahman. So it's Qadar Allah, subhanAllah. So the situation that he inherits is bleak, because as we said, there's problems in the north, problems in the south, and more importantly, there's problems in Spain. So Abdul Rahman, before we fully get into him, I just want to talk about his character profile. And he is among the table amongst the great Muslim rulers, in my opinion. Not, with the Rashidun or Salahuddin or Omar ibn Abdulaziz, rahimahullah, because those are on a different stratosphere. But he's on the table with the likes of Suleiman the Magnificent, Mehmed Fatih, Aurangzeb, Tipu Sultan. He's among the table amongst, he can rival them in terms of what he done and how he achieved certain things for Islam. So Abdul Rahman comes into power, and he's actually the grandson. He's the grandson of Abdullah, because Abdullah killed his two sons, and Abdul Rahman was always Abdullah's favorite. When they would do parades or ceremonies, Abdul Rahman III would sit in his royal seat. So it shows you how much Abdullah loved his grandchild. And a lot of people were, happy and excited for Abdul Rahman III to come into power, because they saw that the previous two Abdul Rahmans were strong. So he sets his sights. He's like, the first thing he has to do is quell the situation within Spain. As we talked about before, there's all these issues, all these revolts, all these rebellions. So what he does is something very clever, something extremely clever, and is that he sends letters requesting for the oath of allegiance. And why is this very clever? Because he didn't just go out attacking straight away. He used diplomacy, and this is something very, very, subhanAllah, important, because he didn't just go and do a madness. He first saw what the situation was like. Will that ruler or that governor accept my bay'ah, or will he not accept my bay'ah? So he started to do that. Some people accepted, and other people didn't accept. So the first thing he done was send military commanders against rebels in the north of Cordoba. In the north of Cordoba, the capital. Because think about it, there's issues everywhere, and to the extent that even in Cordoba itself, there was these rebels. And he was able to defeat them, but the issues didn't stop there, because just outside of Cordoba, there was more rebels. And so he sent a military commander and an army to defeat them. So already in the first year of his reign, he's very successful in his pursuit of these rebels. Then he has done some mistakes. Yeah, for example, there was rebels in the city of Jain in Al-Andalus. He asked for submission. They gave it to him, so he allowed them to go free. But then again he started to rebel So again, he had to show a strong fist, and he quelled the situation again. So even though he was young, he was about 17, 18 when he came into power, he showed good qualities, but also he made mistakes. So when the rebellions in Cordoba were quelled, he started to target Ibn Hafsun. And remember, Ibn Hafsun was his biggest threat, was his biggest enemy. He apostated, he was causing all these issues. So he started to attack and seize the strongholds of the supporters of Ibn Hafsun, the biggest enemy of the Emir. And this successful campaign caused a domino effect where his supporters, they started to dismiss Ibn Hafsun and submit to Abdul Rahman III. So that's Ibn Hafsun, and we'll get onto him later on because he's not defeated straight away. It takes time because he was rebelling for such a long time. He was fighting for such a long time. He built with his Christian supporters, of course, his Muslim supporters. They left him after he apostated, but he was still a very big problem. So the Emir goes to Sevilla. While he's trying to fight all these problems, he goes to Sevilla. And remember, Ibrahim ibn Hajjaj, he's the ruler of Sevilla and a very strong administrator. But Ibrahim ibn Hajjaj, he dies a year after Abdul Rahman comes into power. So who comes into power? His brother, Muhammad ibn Hajjaj. But there's a dispute with someone else by the name of Ahmed bin Salama, and he's his cousin. So there's a little dispute. So Abdul Rahman III, he comes into Sevilla with his army, and Muhammad ibn Hajjaj, he submits to Abdul Rahman III. So he's able to quell all these issues. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So we are on the second part of this lecture, and what we talked about before was that he was fighting the threat of Sevilla, and he managed to quell the situation because Ibrahim ibn Hajjaj had died, and then due to the power struggle between Muhammad ibn Hajjaj and Ahmed bin Masalama, Abdul Rahman III was able to sweep in and force Muhammad ibn Hajjaj into submission. So despite this threat of Ibn Hafsun, and it was still prevalent in Al-Andalus, he kept on doing it. He kept on sending military commanders, and the prevalent was the threat was slowly diminishing, but it was still there. So we have Ibn Hafsun still causing issues. Yes, his power has diminished, but he's still there. And we still have the Christians in the north that Abdul Rahman has to deal with. So at the start of 910, during the latter years of Abdullah's reign, they start attacking Al-Andalus. And they do it all throughout 910 to 920. So what does Abdul Rahman III have to do? He has to respond. And this is the 10th century, where you have to be a strong ruler. If you're not a strong ruler, it'll be open season. Why? Because it's not like the age of liberalism. Oh, we feel sorry for him, give him a trial, all of these kind of things. Do you get what I mean? So he had to attack in the north. And instead of trying to attack them through defeating them, he simply wanted to destabilize them. He didn't want to annex their territory. He didn't want to occupy their territory. It was just to destabilize them and cause infighting. So that was his policy. Regarding the Fatimids was still an issue because in 917, 5 years after he became the Emir, they took the city of Nekor. And Nekor is in modern-day Morocco, and it was a vassal state of Cordoba, so of Al-Andalus. So this was a big issue. And also the Fatimids had defeated the Idrisids in Morocco. So they defeated the Idrisids in Morocco, so they were quite powerful. So, and furthermore, the Fatimids started to build up a navy. They started to build up a navy, and so this scared, and this posed an even bigger threat to Al-Andalus, because with that navy, they could then start attacking Spain. So, as a response, Abdul Rahman III, he builds his own fleets in response to what has happened. And the Fatimid threat is still a heavy burden. Despite this, despite the fact that the Fatimids are still causing issues, and that, yes, the Christians have been diminished, the threat has been diminished, it's still not over. And also, even, the Muwallads have been dealt with, and all these semi-independent rulers have been dealt with. But there's still some problems, especially with the Fatimids. Despite all of this, he decides to declare himself the Caliph. He decides to declare himself the Caliph of Islam. And the reason for this is that when he defeated Ibn Hafsun, his son came into power. And from 917 to 928, his son, Ibn Hafsun's son, started to cause rebellion. But Abdul Rahman III was able to defeat him. And so he died in 928. So in the following year, in 929 CE, Abdul Rahman III decided to call himself the Caliph. And he gave himself the title Al-Nasir li-Din Allah, he who brings victory to God's religion. And bearing in mind, he wasn't the only person that called himself the Caliph. We had two other Caliphs within Al-Andalus, within the world. We had the Fatimid Caliphs, who they were in North Africa, and we had the Abbasid Caliph, who was in Baghdad. And you see the Abbasids in Baghdad, they had grown weak because of, as I said before, there was a lot of all these vassal states, all these, and so their power was quite weak. So the meaning of the Caliph, the caliphal title was diminished. And furthermore, you have to think about it, that Abdul Rahman III, his ancestors used to claim the title of Caliph. The Umayyads that ruled Damascus from 661 CE to 750 CE, they called themselves the Caliphs. So he thought it was befitting to him to give himself such a title, despite the fact that, the Fatimids was still an issue. And yes, he quelled the situation with the Christians in the north, but it wasn't totally diminished. They were still present. So, and he saw parallels between his story, because he inherited a throne that was very weak. The power of the emir didn't extend beyond the vicinity of the city of Cordoba, and then he defeated all these rebels. He also destabilized the Christians to a certain extent. He saw parallels to Abdul Rahman I. And if you guys, the people that weren't here last week, Abdul Rahman I was an Umayyad prince that fled an onslaught of his family. So when the Abbasids done their revolution, they usurped the throne, and every single Umayyad family member was killed, except two, Abdul Rahman I and his younger brother Yahya. But Yahya was killed in front of him while he was trying to swim across the Euphrates River. So Abdul Rahman I was a fugitive for 5 years, and then he went to Al-Andalus. He went to Morocco first because his mother was of the Nafsa tribe, which is an Amazigh tribe, and then he went to Al-Andalus and he established a strong government. So he saw parallels between himself and his ancestors. So he believed it was a title befitting of what he had done. So, despite he calls himself the Caliph, Toledo is still an issue. So in 930, just 1 year after becoming the Caliph, he goes to Toledo to defeat these rebels, because Toledo, as I said before, was a hotbed of independence and self-autonomy. And despite the fact that they got help from the Christians from the north, he managed to defeat them. And so he continued to go on battles. For example, there was, and this is his last battle, in 939 CE, called the Battle of Kandahar, or the Battle of the Trench, Kandahar, right?
Khandak.
or the Battle of Simancas, where he went to fight the Christian kingdoms in the north, but he nearly died. The copy of his Quran was stolen, and he barely made it out alive. And so afterwards, he decided, I'm not going to go on any more battles. I'll let my military commanders do the work. Because, think about it, you're the Caliph. You're like the ruler. Yes, there was 3 Caliphs, but he was the ruler. And because the Abbasids were weak and the Fatimids, they followed the Shia Ismaili religion. So he was the ruler. And so his advisors told him, you can't go out and go in these battles, because what happens if the next time you die? And you know, when a ruler dies, you know, in history, they've always tried to hide the fact they die until they found the true successor, the right successor. For example, this is off topic, but when Tipu Sultan's father died, they hid it from people. Why? Because if people knew the ruler had died, there would be rebellion, there would be revolts, insurrections, yani you name it. Then also, the Ottomans, a lot of Ottoman sultans, they would hide the fact, like the people around them would hide the fact that they died. Why? Because there would be a war of succession. The same way in the Mughal Empire. So, where it's very dangerous for a ruler to go out and fight, and then, because he could die in battle, and there would be succession crises, and there would be rebellions, insurrections, there would be all these issues that could be prevalent. So after this battle, he didn't ever go and fight fi sabilillah anymore. So now we've talked about him consolidating power, and that's all good and whatnot. But it's during his reign that we truly see the golden age in Al-Andalus. And not just for the Muslims, but for the Jews as well. We see the golden age for the Muslims and the Jews. And you see the richness and the prosperity in Al-Andalus was absurd. It was, subhanAllah, it was absurd, really, because to think that such a small state, such a small realm, was called the ornament of the world by a German nun by the name of Roswitha. She went to Al-Andalus and she saw how opulent it was. There were 70 libraries, there was universities, there was markets, bathhouses, there was all these things. There was paved and well-lit streets. You know, we have paved streets now. There was paved streets in the 10th century in Al-Andalus. You know, in comparison to Europe, where they'll poo on the street. I'm being honest, they'll poo on the street, or sometimes they'll poo in the house and throw it on the street. This is the reality. There was no irrigation in Europe. None whatsoever. They were in the Dark Ages. But in comparison to the Muslims, what did they do? They had irrigation everywhere. Aqueducts. Aqueducts are basically a type of irrigation as well. So the Muslims were so advanced in Al-Andalus. It was the most advanced civilization on earth. And it was rivaling Baghdad and Constantinople. Constantinople was the Christian city in the world at the time. It wasn't conquered by the Muslims up until 1453. And Baghdad was still a very prosperous city up until the Mongols sacked it in 1258. And there was a large industry producing books, richly decorated textiles, intricately carved out wood, ivory, precious jewelry, metalware. You know, the industry in Al-Andalus was fantastic, and it used to be exported to different parts of Christian Europe and the world, or the known world, because back then no one knew there was the Americas, so it was just Europe, Asia, and Africa. So Andalus, Cordoba specifically, had a population of 400,000 people. 400,000 people. You know what when London had that population? In 1650. And in 950, Cordoba had that population. 400,000 people. A rich city, paved and well-lit streets. Subhanallah. So, and you know what they say? Subhanallah, they say Islam doesn't belong in Europe. They say that, you know, Islam and Europe are two separate things that don't belong. But a caliph was nominated in a European city. And he was the ruler of the most advanced civilization on earth. the ornament of the world, as the German nun alluded to. And when you become the Caliph, when you give yourself such a title, you need to show that you are befitting of this title. So what did he do? He built and commissioned the Medina Azahara. And some of you may not know, some of you may know, but the Medina Azahara was a palace city. So it was a city within a palace. And right now, the Medina Azahara is actually only 10%. You know, like 10% of the building, because it was destroyed during the civil war of Al-Andalus, or the fitna of Al-Andalus in the early 11th century, and we'll talk about it next week, inshallah. And then afterwards, it got destroyed. People would go about taking the materials for whatever purposes they needed it for. But the Medina Azahara was a city, but within a palace. It had tens of thousands of people working, you know, dignitaries, eunuchs, statesmen, advisors, physicians, yani you name all of these, everyone, lots, like the cream of the crop, but also the, you know, the slaves of the state were living there. So it was a very big structure. And unfortunately today, you know, you only see 10% of it, and it's very unfortunate, because to imagine there was silk shops, there was a mosque, there was a mint there was a treasury, it had everything. And it was built by the finest materials. And yes, I don't have a picture, but subhanAllah, if you imagine back then, it was built by the finest materials, and thousands of tons, yes, thousands of tons of marble was used to build this. It showed you the vast wealth and opulence that the Andalusi population were experiencing, to the extent that they built such a magnificent structure. And, you know, Qadar Allah, like, it's one of the great tragedies that you can't see it, because, you know, I went there a few months ago, and you don't see anything, basically. It's just a few structures, and that's it. You can't see anything. But and one more thing within the Medina.
The library is still there, Pablo.
The library?
The libraries, the messages.
I was literally about to go. No, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. It's just some structure and whatnot. You can see some of the Andalusi, like, architecture, you know, where it's like white and orange, and it's in like a horseshoe shape. That's still there, but apart from that, there's nothing.
Is that Sevilla or Toledo?
This is Cordoba, just outside of Cordoba, about 3 miles.
Was remained, or
Now they're trying to preserve it, and they're trying to do archaeological discoveries and see what else there could be. But it takes a long time, you know. Bureaucracy in Spain is, you know.
I thought there was a masjid there.
No, that's the masjid of Cordoba within the city. There was a masjid within Medina Azahara. Within the Medina Azahara, there was not Abdul Rahman III, but his son Al-Hakam II, who was Al-Hakam II. He was more into the intellectual pursuits. He was more into the arts, seeking knowledge, you know, reading books. He was into that, to the extent that he had a personal library of between 400 to 600,000 books. 400 to 600,000 books in his library. And this wasn't a personal library where he just built a library and left it. This was a royal academy where people could go there to seek knowledge. And it had books on everything: theology, science, maths, philosophy, poetry. It had everything you could possibly imagine. And it is said that 44 volumes were needed, was the catalogue. So 44 volumes, yeah, to see what books. So, you know, that section had these books and the other section had these books. It was that vast and grand. And the reason why they had this was because the culture in Al-Andalus was of books. It was of seeking knowledge. It was of trying to become knowledgeable on your field or on your niche. You know, back then we were the most bookly people in the world. For example, Baghdad had 1 million books. And there was, you had Cairo, they had tens of thousands of books. You had all these libraries across the Muslim world back in the day where they had books upon books where they wanted to seek knowledge. And this wasn't nowadays where you can go on Amazon, get 5 books for £10 each. This wasn't like that. This was handwritten books that needed time to, you get the materials, get the book binding facilities and capabilities. And you know what he would do? He would send people across the world, the known world, to Constantinople, to Samarkand, to Bukhara, to Cairo, to Constantinople, to all these cities to collect books, because he was that diligent in trying to seek knowledge. And it's a great shame that nowadays, we're the most unbookly people in the world. When was the last time you read a book? Most people don't read books. We go on YouTube, we scroll on TikTok, we scroll on Instagram and just waste our time doing that. But back then, they were serious on seeking knowledge. But we also have great luminaries within Al-Andalus. So last week, we talked about a man by the name of Abul Qasim al-Zahrawi, also known as Abul Qasis. And he invented over 200 surgical instruments. 200 surgical instruments. A Muslim in Spain in the late 10th and early 11th century, he created over 200 surgical instruments. And nowadays you might go to get an operation and they cut you up and chop you up, and some of these that are used nowadays, they're still using them, subhanallah. And it was not just the Muslims that made breakthroughs and done all these things. Also, Christians used to come from outside of Al-Andalus, from France and Germany and Italy and whatnot. They would come to Spain, they would take the knowledge and bring it back and formulate inventions. For example, one of the popes, by the name of Pope Sylvester II, he went to Barcelona. Barcelona wasn't under the Muslims, but it was in the vicinity of Spain, and Barcelona, the monasteries in Barcelona had a lot of knowledge from the Muslims because of the proximity, right? So he would learn in Barcelona. And then he went to Al-Andalus. He went to Morocco. He went to Al-Qarawiyyin, the university founded by Fatima al-Fihri. He went to that university, and guess what he learned? He copied off the Muslims this computing device by the name of the abacus. And the abacus is basically a numerical kind of invention where it makes it easier to count. And he also brought the decimal number to the Arabic decimal numbers to the Latin world. So back in the day, they would use. He also tried to bring the Arabic numerals, 1, 2, 3, and 4, now that we use now. He tried to bring it back then. However, the Christians didn't want it because they thought, they were at war and at constant loggerheads with the Muslims at that time. Not just that, not just the Muslims had a golden age, not just, the Christians benefited from the knowledge of the Muslims, but also the Jews had their own golden age. You see, let me go back to when the Muslims first came. When the Muslims first came, the Jews saw them as liberators. And this is not my words. This is not the words of some Muslim propagandist that is doing a master's in history. This is the words of a Jewish historian by the name of Chaim Zohar in his book, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewry. He says that the Jews saw the Muslims as liberators. SubhanAllah, I know the exact page as well. Page 8 and 9. You can buy that book and check tomorrow and you'll see what it says there, SubhanAllah. And the reason why they saw them as liberators is because the Christians had, under the Visigoths, they had summoned successive councils in Toledo that put harsh measures on the Jews. They couldn't practice their religion. They were forced into slavery. They were forced converted. All these things. So when the Muslims came to Al-Andalus, of course they'll see them as liberators. And this had an effect where Jews across Europe, would migrate to Spain, because Jews in Christian Europe were oppressed everywhere, because medieval Europe was hotbed of anti-Semitism, where they would accuse of blood libels, and blood libels is where basically they accused Jewish people of taking blood of Christians and then using it in their rituals. These were the accusations they would do, and they would go on pogroms and kill and attack and all of that kind of stuff. However, under the Muslims, it was different. The Muslims, they treated them as a protected minority. And this is not my words. Again, this is the words of Maria Menosal in her book, Ornament of the World. I don't know the page number, I forgot, but I used to remember it, but subhanAllah, I forgot. So, when Abdul Rahman II comes into power, comes into power, when he comes into power, he fosters the Jewish golden age of culture within Al-Andalus. He fosters it. And the reason he does it happens under his reign is due to one man by the name of Hasdai ibn Shakrut. And Hasdai is born in a wealthy family in Jain, but he's raised in Cordoba. And at a young age, he learns Hebrew, Arabic, Latin, and he receives a good education. He then, due to family connections, he climbs up the ranks and becomes the personal physician to Abdul Rahman III. And the personal physician is someone's personal doctor. You know, they see the most intimate parts. A Jewish man was the personal physician to the Muslim Caliph at the time. And he was a very intelligent man, Hasdai ibn Shakrut. For example, he would also handle the gifts of the Caliph. So you know when delegations are sent, they would exchange gifts. Like, you know, nowadays you go to your friend's house or family friends, you know, you exchange gifts, right? So maybe you give chocolates, or you give umbala, or you give like besbousa, you know them ones there.
Yeah, we get it.
Or you go to like for example in Italy, astaghfirullah, they give wine and stuff like that. But that's rhetoric, right? So he handles the gifts. So this is no menial position. This isn't some low position. This is one of the best positions you can have. Personal physician, as well as handling the gifts, to the extent that he sent a letter to this kingdom called Khazaria. He sent it to the leader of Khazaria, and Khazaria were a Turkic tribe that became Jewish. They didn't want to become Muslim because they had a bit of issues with the Arabs, and they didn't want to become Christian because they had issues with the Byzantines. So they became Jewish. Yeah, they were from Central Asia, and they came to Eastern Europe. So where modern day Dagestan, Georgia, Kazakhstan a bit, a bit of Ukraine and stuff. So they were in Eastern Europe. And he sends a letter saying, and I'm paraphrasing, I have been blessed by God for being given this position where I handle the gifts of the great Sultan or the great Emir. So this shows you his position. And he tried to help prevent wars and battles and stuff like that. For example, Otto I, who was a king in Europe, in Northern Europe, he had an issue with the Muslims. Why? Because in the south of France, there was a small Muslim fortress called Franciton. And they used to go up north to raid. They would go Switzerland, they would go central France, they would go all these places to raid. And Otto I was angry. So he sent a Christian monk by the name of John of Gorzo. He sends him. However, Hasdai, he is aware that this letter is insulting and could be deemed blasphemous. So Hasdai keeps him as a prisoner within the Medina Azahara. He keeps him as a prisoner until he sees the letter, because he knows like this letter is insulting and it could cause outrage and maybe a war and stuff like that. So Hasdai keeps him prisoner for many years, for 3 years. And he during that time, he gets revealed the letter. and his suspicions are met. And it's a letter that contains blasphemous words. So Hasdai gets Abdul Rahman III to send a Christian bishop in Al-Andalus to go to Gorzo, which is in France, and it's part of Otto's realm, part of his kingdom, to get a new letter, which is more inviting and whatnot. But at the end of the day, this story actually doesn't. It's a kind of I don't know what word you could say, but it doesn't actually matter in the grand scheme of things. Why? Because Otto is able to defeat the Muslim fortress in the south of France. But it showed you how he tried to quell the war, and he tried to help the Muslims in terms of not trying to go to war with Otto in the north of Europe. And also one thing he does is that he patronizes and pays for learning institutions for the Jewish people. So he builds this academy of Jewish learning in Cordoba in 948 CE. And this would go on to rival two in Iraq, one in North Iraq and one in Southern Iraq. And these two were the authorities in Jewish learning. So it shows you that the Jews were able to prosper and benefit from Muslim rule. So it shows you what these pseudo-historians on TikTok and Instagram that have never read a book, that haven't even done a degree, a BA, a bachelor's degree, they say that the Muslims have persecuted and they're backwards and barbaric and all they do is oppression. But it shows you that the Muslims fostered all this prosperity and intellectual flourishing for the Jewish people. So, and it's not just Hasdai ibn Shaprut. He's an exception. Of course, he's an exception in the sense that he had such high positions and he was exchanging the gifts. He was a personal physician and he funded a lot of Jewish learning. But we also have other great luminaries that prospered and flourished within Al-Andalus. For example, I'm just going to run you through them. Judah Halevi, he was well versed in Arabic, Hebrew, and classical sciences, including medicine and philosophy. Then you have Moses ibn Ezra, who was a prolific poet. You have Solomon ibn Gabriel, who was a poet and philosopher. And to the extent, now the timeline is a bit all over the place because I'm going on this tangent about the Jewish Golden Age. However, a man by the name of Bahya ibn Paquda in 1085 CE, and this is 100 years after Hasdai ibn Shaprut has died and whatnot. He says that let him know our living conditions is the same or if not better than theirs in terms of civil strife and disobedience. Bahya ibn Paquda says this, and he's a Jewish man that says the living conditions of the Jews is better than the Muslims in terms of, when there's civil disobedience, there's civil strife. And the reason why he's talking about this, and we'll talk about it next week, is that during the Taifa period, there was political instability. Yes, there was prosperity, cultural flourishing. It was a very crazy time because there was about 30 independent states within Al-Andalus, and they'll fight against each other, yet it was prosperous. Yet there was all these breakthroughs by Muslims and Jews. So during also this time, there was another scholar and prolific poet by the name of Samuel ibn Nagrillah, or Samuel Hanagid, and he had many things going for himself. He was an advisor, a tax collector, a secretary, and he eventually became the vizier of Granada, which was a Taifa state, a mini city state. And he would lead Muslims with the Muslim armies. So he had this position. So it again shows you that, the Muslims didn't discriminate. We didn't just go out and oppress and do all of this stuff. Non-Muslims prospered and achieved high positions under Islamic rule. And to the extent that Jewish thinkers from across the known world would come to enjoy his patronage. There were Jewish people from across Europe, North Africa, from across the known world at that time, they would go because they knew that he would pay for their studies and whatnot. So, but that's that. I just wanted to talk about that because it's very important. It's very important to talk about these things, because one of my kind of objectives trying to become a historian is to demystify all these accusations that the Islamophobes perpetuate, where they say, as I've said multiple times, the Muslims are oppressive, they massacre, they do all this madness. And literally, subhanAllah, one of my masters is going to be on religious coexistence within Al-Andalus. But that's a topic for another day. So now we're going to go on to the last figure within the golden age of Al-Andalus. And that's a man by the name of Muhammad ibn Abi Amir, also known as Al-Mansur or Al-Mansur. And to understand his rise to power, we need to first look at Abdul Rahman III. So he created such a strong foundation for his state. It was so strong that it became the undoing. Sometimes you're so cunning and so clever that you create foundations that can actually do your undoing. It's a paradox in itself, but this is what happened. The reason for this is because his son, Al-Hakam II, who had that vast library, all he done was just read and follow his intellectual pursuits. So he allowed the day-to-day running of his state, he gave it to his closest advisors. He gave it to people that were close to him. For example, there was two men, Ghalib and Al-Mushafi. However, it would be Muhammad ibn Abi Amir, Al-Mansur or Al-Mansur, that would become the de facto ruler of Al-Andalus. And because the de jure ruler was Al-Hakam, and he had power, but then when his son came into power, Hisham II, who was only 10, 12 at the time, he was very young, he was the de jure ruler, meaning he was the ruler in name, but Al-Mansur became the de facto ruler, the ruler in reality.
He was the figurehead.
He was the figurehead. Jazakallah khair. So Al-Mansur, let's talk about a bit about his what's it called? His life, right? Al-Mansur was of high lineage. The reason for this was that he had descended from a Yemeni family that came to Al-Andalus, that arrived to Al-Andalus during the conquest, the Umayyad conquest in 711. And he began to work his way up through the state. He began to work his way up through climbing up the ranks. So first he became a scrivener, so a scribe. So that's someone that writes for important people. Then he became the wakil, meaning the administrative and financial trustee. He was also, before that, he was a secretary to Al-Hakam's wife, Sub. And some people say that they had a love affair, Sub and Al-Mansur. But we don't know. It's just that they were so close that, and she would give him all these positions that people thought that this was the case. Then he became the director of mint. What is that? Someone that runs the mint. They make the money. So he had a high position, and he had other positions that he just started to accumulate over time. But I'm not going to go over them because there's so many, and it would just bore you. So one thing he would do was patronize people. He would patronize people because that would get him allies. And if anyone's read the book 48 Laws of Power, Law 40, it says despise the free lunch. Why? Because you buy someone a free lunch, they feel indebted to you. Yeah? And this is what he would do. He would patronize people. He would pay for their estates. And estates means like property and whatnot. He would pay for their stuff. He would give them money, whatever the case may be. He would patronize a lot of people. So he would build a network of supporters.
Is that why they say nothing's for free?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he started to build a network of supporters. But his main goal was to win over Ghalib and Al-Mushafi, the two people that were in control of the state during Al-Hakam's reign. So, in the meantime, he decided to distinguish himself in the battlefield. So he was sent to the Maghrib alongside Ghalib, where they defeated the Idrisids. And this victory gave him a lot of respect, and it earned the trust of Ghalib himself and Al-Hakam, the Caliph at the time. And as a result, he was appointed the chief inspector of the mercenary division, which was mostly comprised of Amazigh soldiers. But you may be wondering, how did he become the real ruler of Al-Andalus? So this starts when Al-Hakam II, in 974 CE, he suffers a stroke. So he leaves the running of the day-to-day affairs to Al-Mushafi, and he starts to groom his son, who's very young, Hisham II, to become the next ruler. And Al-Mushafi and Ghalib were, understood what was going on. So Al-Mushafi was about to marry his daughter, Asma, to Ghalib's son. However, Al-Mansur intervened, and he then married Al-Mushafi's daughter. And so this is all happening at the same time. Then Al-Hakam dies 2 years later, 976 CE. So the Christians, they attack deep into Al-Andalus for the first time, and this is unheard of. People think like this might be the end, because Hisham II is quite young, Al-Hakam II has died. What's going to happen next? Where there's big issues. So what does Al-Mansur do? He starts to go on campaigns. This is where he gets his name, Al-Mansur, the victorious. Do you know on how many campaigns he goes on? 50. Do you know how many he loses? 0. Do you know what he would do? He would portray these fights as fighting fi sabilillah. He would go and fight fi sabilillah, and he would collect the dust, because there's a hadith where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, anyone whose feet gets covered with dust in Allah's cause will not be touched by the hellfire. So he would collect the dust, and when he got buried in 1002 CE, he got buried with the dust, because it was a way to show that I fought in the path of Allah. So, a sign of things to come, what did he do? He created his own palace city. So you know how there was the Medina Azahara? Do you know what he done? He called it the Medina Azahara. The Medina Azahara, the radiant city. And this alarmed people. And so there was a commotion, and then people tried to kill, for some reason, Hisham II, the boy Caliph. So the people that tried to assassinate him, they were publicly executed and eliminated. And he then began to eliminate other potential enemies who had positions of power and influence. But the main one was Ghalib. So what happened was that Al-Mansur began to attack his allies, to the extent that a battle ensued, called the Battle of Atienza. The Battle of Atienza. And Ghalib was on the verge of victory. He was old, he was frail, all of these things, but he was on the verge of victory. But what happened? He returned back to Allah on the verge of victory. And so, when the main figurehead dies, it caused a bit of instability. And so what happened? The Al-Mansur emerged victorious. So following this victory, Al-Mansur was unchallenged. And I forgot to mention, he had Al-Mushafi arrested. So now he was unchallenged. It was his time. Now he was the de facto ruler. And he was the undisputed ruler. And he was actually a very pious man. Allahumma barik. He was trained as a Maliki jurist. So Malikism was the madhab within Al-Andalus. He was trained as a jurist. He would write his own copies of the Quran. He purged a lot of the books within Al-Hakam's library. Why? Because some of them had like philosophy, astrology, these things that were deemed unorthodox and un-Islamic. So he had them purged. But subhanAllah, what happened to them is that some of these books were smuggled to Toledo. And we'll talk about Toledo in more detail next week, inshallah. And he also does the last extension to the Masjid of Cordoba. So the great Masjid of Cordoba, that nowadays there's a small church inside, and they've completely ruined the structure of the Masjid. He commissioned the last extension, and he done half. So he doubled the Masjid. He doubled the Masjid in size. And he was a great ruler. He was a great ruler, Al-Mansur. Yes, it wasn't hunky-dory how he established power. It wasn't smooth sailing. Yes, he done certain things. But when Al-Hakam died, and there was that political instability, he took matters into his own hands, this political instability, and he established a strong government to the extent that he done 50 campaigns, never losing a single one. And Al-Andalus was still prosperous under him. And Al-Andalus reached its greatest extent under his rule. And Al-Mansur, he returns back to Allah in 1002 CE. And he was a great ruler. But as we'll see next week, some of his policies caused the undoing and the civil war that ensues within Al-Andalus about 10 years after he dies. So, Jazakallah khair, everyone, for listening. Any good is from Allah, and any mistakes are my own. Jazakallah khair.